boy.
Worry not, my brothers in arms. I will protect thee. What a douchebag. Right? I hate that guy. Consider yourselves heroically intervened.
Should we just crump both?
Both. Both is good. Come again? In hindsight, I feel like I could have played this better. Worry not, my brother in arm, as I will teach thee. Hello and welcome back to another 40k Tactics video. In today's video we're going to talk about 5 ways of how the heroic intervention stratagem can and will win you the game. There are the obvious options, but there's also the more nuances plays. Some that don't even intend to deal damage at all, and some that, if you can pull them off, will surprise your opponent and absolutely mess with their game plan. And in this video I will demonstrate all 5 different tactics, and I will do so with real life 40k miniatures on an actual tabletop. My name is Damien Cooper and welcome to High Stakes 40k, where we are all in on Warhammer. Before we jump into all the 5 methods, let's quickly talk about what the heroic stratagem actually is. Heroic intervention is a 1 command point core stratagem that everybody can use. The only exception is that you can't use it with a vehicle unless you are a walker. So here's how the stratagem works. The opponent just ended a successful charge move and you have a unit within 6 inches of that enemy unit. And your unit is also eligible to declare a charge as if it was your own charge phase. Now you can spend 1 command point and have that unit charge the unit that just ended a charge move against one of your own units. And just for clarification, here we have another rather poorly written Games Workshop rule, because at the very end it states that your unit does not receive any charge bonus. The charge bonus refers to a specific core rule that lets your unit fights first after they ended a charge move. And that is the only thing you're not receiving. Any other charge bonuses like +1 strength, +1 attack, and any other abilities that your unit has, you're still getting. After you spend the command point and you are within 6 inches of that enemy unit, you just declare a charge just as if it was your charge phase. You roll the charge, you move your models accordingly, nothing has changed. So now, without any further ado, let's jump right in and talk about the number 1 way of how heroic intervention can win you games. And that is the protection method. So here's the likely easiest and also most common way of using heroic intervention. In our example, we are the Space Marine player, and we have an Invader ATV sitting on an objective marker to score us primary points. 6 inches away from our Invader ATV, safely sitting behind a wall, we have a unit of Blade Guard veterans with a Judicia. The unit here is safely out of line of sight, so it can't get shot by our opponent. The Judicia leading the Blade Guard veterans also has the Fights First ability, meaning that if we end our charge, even though we're not receiving the charge bonus as stated earlier, we will still get to fight before our opponent. So now when our opponent, the Orc player, has a unit of knobs that want to charge our Invader ATV to not only kill it, but also take away our primary points, we can then use the heroic intervention stratagem, use our Blade Guard unit to charge the knobs after they ended their charge move, and since we do have the Fights First ability, we get to fights first, and we're just going to annihilate the knobs before they even get to swing. So this makes our Invader ATV very well protected, because unless the opponent can shoot it, they don't really have a good way of charging it without getting a heroic intervention from our Blade Guard unit and die before they even get to crump. Of course, not everybody has a unit with a Fights First ability, but there's still ways of pulling this off. Let's take a similar example. We still have an Invader ATV sitting on our point to score us primary. Now, behind the wall, we have a unit of Assault Terminators instead of the Judicia with a Blade Guard unit. Now our opponent has a unit of Storm Boys and they want to charge the ATV to deny us primary points and potentially even destroy the ATV. Now we can still use the heroic intervention stratagem to countercharge the Storm Boys with our Terminators. And even though the Storm Boys still get to hit us first, and some might actually choose to hit the Terminators instead of the ATV, the Storm Boys aren't really equipped to deal with high toughness 2+ safe models. So here we can just safely run into them and probably not even lose a single Terminator before we get to hit back and kill all of the Storm Boys. So here it is important that we create a mismatched scenario and that the unit that we use the heroic intervention stratagem on is a lot tougher than the unit that charged us in the first place can handle. But what if we are unable to create such a mismatched scenario and that the unit that is charging our invader ATV is actually very well equipped to also kill our assault terminators, just like we've seen in the intro? Let's say our opponent has a unit of breaker boys that is charging the invader ATV, and that unit could do a lot of damage to our terminators. Here we need to take advantage of our opponent having to base the ATV. After the orc player has finished basing all of the models to the invader ATV, now we can heroic in, and we need to make sure that we're basing as little of their models as possible. Of course, if you roll a really high charge and we have to base all of our opponent's model with our own models, then this isn't working. And if that happens, I might even be inclined to reroll the charge to try to get a lower value. So here we need to make sure that as little as possible Breaker Boy models can actually get into engagement range or base-to-base contact with our terminators. So here we usually take our closest model, base one of the Breaker Boys, and then if none of our other terminators can also base the other Breaker Boys, then we only need to move closer than we were before and just string them around our one model and then pile into engagement range. So only one Breaker Boy can hit our terminators, but then when they kill our ATV, we get to pile in and kill the Breaker Boys instead. And here sometimes you need to even sacrifice a model just to kill the opponent's unit. I have one more example for you of how we can use the protection method, and then we're moving on to method number 2, because there is an even sneakier way to do so. In our last example, we have a Death Guard Rhino sitting on a point. Our orc opponent now wants to take a unit of Gretchen to charge the Rhino. Obviously they can't kill the Rhino, they just want to charge it to out-OC it and therefore deny us primary points. So in their movement phase, they will move the Gretchen towards our Rhino. But then at the end of their movement phase, we're going to use the rapid ingress stratagem and deep strike a unit of Death Shroud terminators right next to our Rhino. And even if the Gretchen get as close as 5 or 4 inches to our Rhino, we can still safely rapid ingress 9 inches away from the Gretchen and still cover the entirety of our Rhino. So now, if the Gretchen charged the Rhino, we can use the heroic intervention stratagem and kill all of the Gretchen. And that puts our opponent in a very bad spot, because if they charge the Rhino, we will heroic and we will kill the Gretchen, so the Gretchen die for nothing, and they might even give us extra movement. And that brings us to our next method, method number 2. The second method I like to call the control method. Here we're going to use the heroic intervention stratagem to dictate the board state as well as the tempo of the game. In our first example, we are the orc player and we have a unit of commandos adjacent to an objective marker, but we're not on the objective marker. Now our opponent wants to charge our commandos, kill them with a unit of JPI, and then consolidate onto the objective marker to score something like secure no man's land, for example. But we as the orc player have a unit of storm boys within 6 inches of the commandos. So once the JPI charged the commandos, we are going to use the heroic intervention stratagem and charge in with our storm boys. Here it's rather unlikely that our storm boys will kill the JPI, so it's not really a protection method because they will probably kill some commandos, maybe they split their attacks and kill some of the storm boys. They won't have enough attacks to kill both units though, and that is important. So now we're going to heroically intervene with our storm boys, and since we already stated, it's highly unlikely that the JPI are going to kill 10 orc bodies. As long as there's still a couple of orcs left, the JPI can consolidate onto the objective marker in the middle and thus do not achieve their goals. And if you want to brush up on how consolidation works, I just made a video and I will link it up here. So here we use the heroic intervention stratagem without the intention of actually killing our opponent. We just want to control their movement. We can also use the heroic intervention stratagem to gain extra movement. Let's say we have a very scary unit of warboss with 10 knobs, and our opponent made sure that they are far away from the knobs so that we can charge them next turn. But then when we're using the Heroic Intervention stratagem, we gain at least an extra 6 inches, maybe more after the charge. We will then kill the JPI that just charged our commandos, and then we gain so much more extra movement that we can then use to actually get off a charge into our opponent's valuable units. So now let's move on to number 3, and this is one of my favorite methods, and I call it the shield. Here we're going to use the Heroic Intervention stratagem, again, not to actually deal damage to our opponent, but to prevent them from dealing damage to our important units. In our example, we are the Death Guard player, and we have a unit of Plague Marines with 2 characters, and the entire unit costs more than 300 points, and it would be very sad to lose them. Now our opponent, the World Eater player, has a unit of Khorne Berserkers led by Kharn the Betrayer. Now the World Eater player made their charge and they just got into base-to-base contact with 1 Khorne Berserkers and the others are slightly trailing behind. So is Kharn the Betrayer. Once the World Eater player activates their unit, they can easily pile in 3 inches into our Plague Marines, all of them can fight, and then they will most certainly annihilate all of our Plague Marines. But here we have a unit of Poxwalkers within 6 inches of our Plague Marines. So once the World Eater player ended their charge move, we are going to heroically intervene. And here we're going to base as many Khorne Berserkers as we can, as well as Kharn the Betrayer. So now once the World Eater players activates the Khorne Berserkers, they can't use the pile-in move to get into our Plague Marines, because they're already in base-to-base contact with our Poxwalkers. Now the Khorne Berserkers, as well as Kharn the Betrayer, will annihilate our Poxwalkers, but only one of the Khorne Berserkers is actually in engagement range with our Plague Marines and can swing at them, and he won't do much damage. Now once it's our turn as the Death Guard player, we can pile in 3 inches into the Khorne Berserkers and our Plague Marines will just kill the entire squad of Khorne Berserkers. A lot of the times our opponent's unit has a very scary character or some special weapons. And now by using the Heroic Intervention stratagem on a cheap chaff unit, we can shield our more valuable unit from these weapons or characters and thus protect them. Now let's move on to method number 4, and I call this the escape. So here we're going to use the Heroic Intervention stratagem not to protect others, not to shield anyone, not to deal damage, but just to save our own butt. In our example, we are the Chaos Knight player, and we're facing the Waaagh turn of the Orcs. They have multiple units lined up to charge all of our knights and do as much damage as they possibly can. They have a unit of Beast Snaggers with a Beast Boss sitting on one flank and a unit of War Boss with Breaker Boys on the other flank. The Beast Snaggers want to charge our War Dog Carnivore and the Breaker Boys want to get a charge off into our Knight Despoiler. Let's say the Orc player charges the Beast Snaggers into our Carnivore first. Now we can use the Heroic Intervention stratagem on our Knight Despoiler and heroically intervene into the Beast Snaggers. We're obviously not going to do this to deal damage into the Beast Snaggers, we're not going to do this to shield them from any of the attacks, we're actually taking some attacks onto our Knight Despoiler. But what we did here is we moved away from the Breaker Boys. And now the initial 5-inch charge from the Breaker Boys turns into an 11-inch charge. So here it is very unlikely that the Breaker Boys will actually get to charge our Knight Despoiler, and they're probably just sitting around doing nothing. And we get to save our Knight Despoiler, because there's not enough Beast Snaggers that could actually hit the Knight Despoiler to actually do some serious damage on it. We will still use the Carnivore and probably even be still in combat, but we will keep our Knight Despoiler alive and it can just shoot the Beast Snaggers or the Breaker Boys in our turn. Now if the Orc player is more of a cunning than a brutal one, they will charge the Breaker Boys first. And then we can do the same thing with our War Dog Carnivore. And we can use the Heroic Intervention stratagem to go into the Breaker Boys. Because even though they might still kill our Knight Despoiler, we can then hit back with the Carnivore and we just escaped from the Beast Snagger charge. So now I want to know from you guys in the comments down below. Have you ever used a Heroic Intervention stratagem to run away from your opponent? Now let's move on to method number 5 of how you can do the Heroic Intervention stratagem to win games. And this is what I call the objective control method. And here I'm going to tell you a secret that I bet you didn't know before. You know how you win games of Warhammer 40k? Correct. By scoring more points than your opponent. And this we can do by scoring a lot of points of our own or denying our opponent points. Or ideally both. And here we'll show you how you can do this via the heroic intervention stratagem. In our example, we have a truck sitting on an objective marker to score us primary points next turn. Now, in our opponent's turn, the Space Marine player will use their jump pack intercessors to charge our truck. 5 jump pack intercessors are very unlikely to kill a truck. But this is not why they charged the truck. The Space Marine player charged the truck because they have now more objective control on the objective marker than we, the Orc player, with our truck. Because our truck is only objective control 2, but the unit of jump pack intercessors has a combined objective control of 5. And luckily for us, we have a unit of Loyal Gretchen within 6 inches of our truck again. And speaking of Loyal Gretchen coincidentally is also the name of one of the tiers on my Patreon account. So if you're interested in supporting this channel to make it possible that I can keep creating these cinematic high quality videos in the future, maybe consider supporting me and opt for one of the tiers down in the description below. But back to the Gretchen. By charging our unit of Gretchen onto the objective marker, we now have way more objective control on the objective marker. We probably will use a couple of Gretchen, but we won't use enough to not still have more objective control on there than the Space Marine player. So now via using the heroic intervention stratagem, we made sure that we have enough objective control on this objective marker to score it in our next turn. There's also more niche scenarios where we can use this method to steal objective markers that we didn't have any models on before. In our next example, we are the Orc player again, and we have a unit of Knobs led by a War Boss next to an objective marker, but we're not on it. Now our Knobs get charged by a unit of Plague Marines, and the Plague Marines will very likely kill all of our Knobs with a War Boss. But in Warhorde we have a fight on death stratagem, which we are going to use to then also kill the Plague Marines afterwards. So we assure mutual destruction. Afterwards, our Knobs are dead, and the unit of Plague Marines is dead as well, and no one is on the objective marker. So here we can use a unit of Storm Boys to heroically intervene into the Plague Marines. And now we put the Death Guard player in a difficult position, because now they need to decide if they want to allocate all of their attacks into the Knobs to make sure to kill them, but then the Storm Boys will survive and score us points, or if they want to split their attack and risk not killing either unit completely. So here we can use the heroic intervention method to get movement onto an objective marker. Let's take the same scenario and the unit of Plague Marines charges our Knobs. We use a -1 to wound stratagem. Our Knobs survive, but even if they kill all of the Plague Marines, they are outside of 3 inches of that objective marker. And even if we kill all of them, we can't consolidate onto the objective marker because we're too far away. So by heroically intervening with the Storm Boys, we will make sure that we will have a unit of Storm Boys on the objective marker at the end of the turn. If the Death Guard player decides to kill the Storm Boys instead, then that's also fine for us, because then our objective control method turned into a shielding method. Those were the 5 most important methods of how heroic intervention can win you games. There's actually a couple more and more niche ones that I won't cover in today's video. But I want to give an honorable mention to one thing. Another good way of using the heroic intervention stratagem is by applying buffs or debuffs to either your unit or the opponent's units. Maybe you have a unit around that gives benefits to your unit or gives some debuffs to an enemy unit. Let's say we have a unit of Nurglings nearby, so we can use the heroic intervention stratagem to then have them get -1 to hit. Maybe we have a unit that forces a battle shock at the start of the fight phase with all the enemy units that they are engaged with. That we can also use by heroically intervening, forcing them to do a battle shock test, and if the battle shock test works, then they can't use any offensive stratagems, for example. Just keep this in mind. If you have some units that have abilities where you need to be within engagement range of an enemy unit, you can use your heroic intervention stratagem to get within engagement range with them, and therefore apply these buffs or debuffs. There you have it. Now I want to know from you guys which one was your favorite method. And do you even have an anecdote of how heroic intervention won you a game in the past? And if you like this video, then please give it a thumbs up because it really helps the channel grow. Consider subscribing for more tactic videos like this. And if you really like this video, then maybe consider becoming a YouTube member or sign up to any of the tiers on my Patreon down in the description below. My name is Damien Cooper and this was High Stakes 40k, where we are all in on Warhammer.